The Empress Valerix Ethrun sat on her star throne, high above the main hall of her palace. Light from 1,000 distant suns poured through the tall crystal windows, casting long beams across the floor. She looked down at her albino hatchlings, lying in their soft nest of white silks and glowing softly in the pale light. Their scales were smooth and pure, shimmering like pearls, but their eyes were cold and distant. For all the care she had given them, they would not respond to her. They would not even look at her when she called their names. Valerix felt a strange emptiness. She was the ruler of thousands of star systems, feared and respected by all who knew her. Yet in this moment she could not command the hearts of her own children. They stirred only when the servants brought food or when machines hummed, feeding them automatically. The Empress leaned forward, her clawed hands gripping the arms of the throne. She had expected adoration, obedience, love even, but none of it came. Outside the nursery the galaxy moved quietly. Ships glided past moons and asteroids, delivering supplies or carrying emissaries. In one quiet corner of the Empire, a small human ship drifted toward the palace, damaged and barely able to maintain orbit. On board, a human family struggled to keep their child safe. His name was Iron Hale and he was no older than 5. The family had survived storms of radiation and meteoroid showers, and now, as their ship creaked under the strain of the docking bay, Iron stared at the stars with wide, curious eyes. The palace doors opened automatically, and human attendants guided the small family inside. The Empress had allowed the humans temporary shelter, nothing more. They were weak, fragile, and irrelevant to the Empire. Or so she thought. Iron did not notice the grandeur of the halls. He did not bow or speak in the formal language. He simply toddled forward, his small hands reaching for everything shiny and glowing. The attendants tried to stop him, worried for his safety, but the child giggled and ran on, fearless. It was that laughter that drew the hatchlings' attention. One by one, their heads lifted, their pale eyes focusing not on their mother, not on the machines feeding them, but on the tiny human in the doorway. They blinked slowly, tilting their heads as though trying to understand what he was. Valerix watched, frozen. The hatchlings had never reacted like this to anyone before. Not to scholars, not to soldiers, not even to her. Her stomach twisted. Something was happening that she could not control. Iron wandered closer, his small feet silent on the polished floor. He stopped at the edge of the nest and crouched down. "Hello," he whispered softly. The hatchlings stretched their necks, almost leaning toward him. One let out a soft, high-pitched chirp, a sound it had never made for anyone else. Iron giggled, clapping his hands. "You like me?" he asked simply. The Empress felt heat rising to her cheeks under her white scales. She had ruled the galaxy with wisdom and power, yet here was a child who made her children react more than she could. She stepped closer, but even her presence seemed to shrink away from them. The hatchlings did not move toward her. They moved toward Iron. One little albino curled its body gently around his legs, and the others followed slowly, sensing the safety he radiated. Valerix's mind raced. Could a human child really be the cause of this? Impossible. Humans were fragile. Humans were weak. And yet, the evidence lay before her eyes. Her hatchlings, rare, magical, and feared across the stars, preferred the human over their Empress. She felt a strange ache she had never known. It was not fear, exactly, and not anger. It was something else. Something she had never felt toward any being in the galaxy. Servants and scientists rushed in, whispering reports and theories. Machines were checked, temperatures monitored, chemical balances analyzed. Nothing explained it. Every experiment, every formula, every ancient technique failed to account for the simple truth. Her children had chosen. They had chosen Iron. Valerix clenched her claws. She could not command affection, not even from her own brood. And yet she could not turn away. She had to watch. Iron laughed again and the hatchlings chirped and cooed. One of them climbed carefully onto his shoulder, balancing as he giggled in delight. The others nuzzled at his hands, sniffing him gently. Valerix swallowed, trying to maintain the composure expected of an empress. She had controlled armies, navigated wars, and made entire worlds obey her. And now, a single child could bend her hatchlings' hearts without a word of command. Time passed, but the hatchlings remained near the human. Valerix felt an unfamiliar urge to kneel, to touch them gently, but she resisted. She observed silently, a mixture of fascination and fear twisting inside her. The human's simplicity, his fearlessness, his warmth, it was unlike anything she had ever encountered. These were qualities that no throne, no technology, no empire could replicate. As the first light of a distant sun bathed the nursery in pale gold, The Empress finally spoke, her voice low and uncertain. "Who are you, little one?" she asked, more to herself than to Iron. The child looked up at her, eyes wide and shining. He did not bow. He did not hesitate. "I'm Iron," he said softly. "Do you want to play?" Valerix realized that the hatchlings had already answered for her. They were not hers to command. Their loyalty, their affection had gone elsewhere, not because of fear or strength but because of trust and kindness. And somehow she knew the galaxy had just shifted under her throne. A single human child had done what no ruler, no army, no empire could ever do: touch the hearts of dragons. She leaned back on her throne, quiet now, as the hatchlings crawled closer to Iron, their soft scales glowing faintly. For the first time in her life, Valerix understood that power was not always about control. Sometimes it was about presence, patience, and the courage to be gentle. And as the child laughed again, the Empress knew that the silent nursery under the star throne had already begun to change forever. The stars outside the palace shimmered, unaware of the small miracle occurring within. And in that moment, the Empress could only watch and wonder what lessons this tiny human might bring, not just to her hatchlings but to the entire galaxy. Iron Hale had quickly become the center of attention in the Empress's silent nursery, though he had no idea of the power he held. The albino hatchlings now followed his every movement, their pale scales glowing softly in the dim light. Valerix Ethrun watched from above her throne, still uneasy. She had ruled countless star systems, controlled fleets, and bent worlds to her will. Yet a small human child seemed to command the hearts of her brood without even trying. The attendants were nervous. Protocol forbade allowing a human anywhere near the Imperial hatchlings. But Iron showed no fear. He walked into the nursery as if he belonged, reaching out to touch the soft scales with gentle hands. The hatchlings leaned into him, chirping and nudging his palms. They did not scream, they did not hiss, they simply stayed close. Valerix descended slowly from her throne, curiosity overcoming her caution. "Child," she said, her voice smooth but commanding. "Why are you not afraid?" Iron looked up at her, his bright eyes unshaken. "Because they are nice," he said simply. "They don't bite. They just want friends." The Empress frowned. She had seen humans before, many of them clever or strong. But none had ever spoken to dragons without trembling, without hiding behind rules or weapons. Iron was different. He had no pride, no fear, no demand for recognition. He only had a quiet confidence, the kind that made others lower their guards. Iron moved closer to the largest hatchling, a tiny dragon with pearly wings that reflected the light like a prism. "Hello, friend," he said softly. The hatchling tilted its head, its small horns glinting. Then, as if understanding, it leaned into him, resting its tiny head on his shoulder. Iron giggled, patting its smooth scales. The other hatchlings followed, each one finding a small way to touch him, to feel safe in his presence. The scientists observing through crystal panels whispered amongst themselves. "It cannot be genetics," one said. "No human should have this effect." Another nodded. "It must be something else. Something emotional." They watched as the hatchlings' responses grew stronger, more coordinated. Every time Iron approached, they glowed brighter, chirped more softly, and even began curling around his small frame as if protecting him. Valerix felt a strange sensation in her chest. It was not anger nor fear. It was almost jealousy. She had raised these hatchlings herself, tended to their every need. Yet they had ignored her calls, her presence, and now they clung to a fragile human like he was their son. She straightened, reminding herself that she was the Empress. She could not allow herself to be swayed by something so simple. And yet she could not look away. Iron did not notice the Empress's inner struggle. He simply continued to play quietly with the hatchlings, stacking soft cushions for them to climb, singing little songs he had learned from his mother, humming as he fed them tiny morsels of food. The hatchlings chirped in delight, curling around him when he laughed, nuzzling him when he hummed. Each gesture, simple as it was, strengthened the invisible bond between them. For the first time, Valerix approached the hatchlings closely, her great claws hovering above the soft floor. She tried to touch them, but they recoiled, not in fear but in preference. They leaned toward Iron instead. She felt a pang, an unfamiliar ache. She had never been denied her children's affection before. The galaxy had never dared ignore her. And now a small human child had done exactly that. Iron noticed the Empress watching and waved a small hand. "Hello. Do you want to play too?" he asked, his voice innocent and open. The hatchlings shifted slightly but did not move toward her. They stayed close to Iron, chirping softly. Valerix realized then that the bond was not about fear or command. It was about trust, kindness and calm. She had tried to rule with power. Iron ruled with nothing but presence. The attendants and scientists exchanged worried glances. No human had ever survived a close encounter with albino hatchlings without trembling. No one had ever been able to calm them without technology or magic. Iron did it with a smile, a touch and laughter. The room seemed to hum with quiet energy, soft and alive, as if the hatchlings themselves were sending a message the Empress could not yet understand. As the hours passed, Iron continued to sit with the hatchlings. He taught them simple games, showed them how to roll gently on cushions, and even hummed little melodies that made them sway in unison. Valerix observed silently, feeling her rigid control loosen. She noticed how each hatchling reacted differently to him, yet all were drawn to his calm energy. They did not fight, they did not bite, they only followed, learned, and trusted. Finally, the Empress spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "Child, how do you do this?" Iron shrugged, his small shoulders rising. "I don't do anything. I just stay close. They like me. I like them." His simplicity struck her deeply. She had built empires, planned battles, and navigated politics. But this gentle, quiet connection, was something she had never learned. The day passed and the hatchlings grew more attached. They curled around Iron even when he moved, climbed onto his small shoulders, and chirped softly in contentment. Valerix realized that her brood had already chosen him. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this bond would not be broken by commands or decrees. It was something far stronger than power. That night, Valerix returned to her quarters, her mind restless. She had ruled countless worlds, yet she felt powerless in the face of a child's simple courage and kindness. She thought of the hatchlings, glowing softly in the nursery with Iron beside them, their small bodies relaxed and happy. For the first time she wondered if the way to rule hearts was not through fear, power, or knowledge, but through presence, patience and quiet care. And somewhere in the nursery Iron laughed again, the sound soft and clear, and the albino hatchlings chirped back. The Empress knew the galaxy had just begun to learn something new, something she had never taught it, that courage and love could be as powerful as fleets and empires, and that sometimes the smallest human could change the hearts of the greatest dragons. The nursery was quiet, except for the soft glow of the albino hatchlings and the gentle hum of life support machines. Iron Hale sat cross-legged on the floor, humming a simple tune, his small hands stroking the scales of the youngest hatchling. Valerix Ethrun watched from her throne above, her eyes narrowed but her curiosity burning. She had observed the child for days, noting how the hatchlings responded to him in ways they had never responded to her. The hatchlings had begun making choices of their own. They refused to eat unless Iron was present, curling around his small frame and chirping softly when he hummed. The attendants had tried to feed them without him, but the hatchlings would simply lie still, their glowing bodies dim and quiet. It was as if the very life inside them depended on the child's presence. Valerix clenched her claws, feeling a mixture of disbelief and unease. These were her children, rare and powerful, yet they had chosen a human over their Empress. Iron did not notice the Empress's discomfort. He played quietly with the hatchlings, stacking soft cushions into towers for them to climb. One hatchling crawled onto his lap, resting its head against his small shoulder. Another perched on his arm, blinking its pale eyes at him. Iron giggled softly and whispered, "There, now everyone can see." The hatchlings chirped in response, curling closer to him, their small wings flickering like candle flames. Suddenly the nursery alarms went off. A minor system failure in the palace caused a section of the nursery ceiling to lower, threatening to crush the soft nests. The attendants froze, unsure how to react, and even Valerix felt a spike of panic. But the hatchlings moved instinctively. They shifted their bodies around Iron, forming a protective circle, their small claws gently pushing against the falling ceiling panels. They hissed softly, a sound of warning, but they did not strike the humans. Their focus was clear, they would not let the child be harmed. Valerix's heart pounded. She had trained them for years to obey her commands, to protect her at all costs. And yet, in this moment, they ignored her entirely, choosing instead to defend a fragile human. She stepped forward, ready to intervene, but paused. She realized that she had no right to command this loyalty. The choice had been made and it was not hers. Iron looked around, confused at first, then smiled softly. "It's okay, little friends. I'm right here." He lifted his hands slowly, and the hatchlings shifted closer, their small bodies brushing against his legs and arms. The ceiling panels slowed as automated stabilizers kicked in, and the danger passed. Iron laughed, a clear, unafraid sound, and the hatchlings chirped back, their bodies relaxing but still pressed close to him. The attendants whispered in awe. No human could survive this without fear, one said. Yet he calmed them. And they protected him. Another nodded. It's more than instinct. It's choice. They are choosing him over the Empress herself. Valerix could not deny it. She had ruled the galaxy, commanded fleets, and bent entire planets to her will. She had faced enemies who wielded power beyond imagination. And now, a small human child had shown her that her hatchlings would not follow force, orders, or authority. They would follow kindness, trust, and courage. She felt a strange emptiness. Power had always been her weapon, her shield, her way of understanding the universe. And yet here it was meaningless. The hatchlings began to groom Iron gently, licking his hands and nuzzling his small shoulders. They had never shown such care to anyone, not to the Empress, not to the scholars, not even to the soldiers who had handled them since birth. Valerix realized then that she was witnessing something she had never expected. Love, chosen freely without coercion. Her brood had made a decision that no decree, no rule, no throne could override. Iron looked up at the Empress, his eyes wide but calm. "Do you want to meet them?" he asked softly. He held out his small hands, palms up, and the hatchlings leaned toward him, their pale scales glowing faintly. Valerix stepped forward slowly, her claws hovering above the floor. One hatchling glanced at her, then returned to nuzzling the child. Another raised its head, observing her but not moving closer. She realized the truth, her presence alone was not enough. She could not force affection, and the hatchlings did not owe her their hearts. She knelt carefully, bringing herself closer to the child without overwhelming him. Iron smiled, patting the hatchlings gently. "See? They like everyone if you are kind," he said. The hatchlings shifted slightly, letting the Empress's hand brush against one of them, but only because Iron's small hand rested on its back. Valerix understood then that love and loyalty could not be commanded, they had to be earned through trust and care. Time passed, and the bond between Iron and the hatchlings grew stronger. They began to follow him wherever he went in the nursery, chirping softly, curling around him when he sat, and resting on his small shoulders when he walked. Valerix observed silently, understanding that this simple human had taught her brood something she had never known, that true loyalty was not about fear or respect, but about connection. That night, the nursery glowed softly under the light of distant stars. Iron slept in a small cot beside the hatchlings, their pale bodies curled protectively around him. Valerix watched from above, feeling a mixture of awe and something unfamiliar, humility. She had ruled countless worlds, yet this child had taught her more about her own brood in a few days than she had learned in years of study and command. The Empress realized that her empire could survive wars, storms, and rebellions, but she had underestimated the power of simple trust and courage. Iron had no title, no fleet, no authority, yet he had earned the love of her hatchlings in a way she never could with commands alone. She felt a strange respect for the human child, understanding that his presence had changed the nursery forever. And as the stars shimmered beyond the crystal windows, the albino hatchlings nestled close to Iron, their soft chirps mingling with his quiet breathing. Valerix leaned back, knowing the galaxy had begun to see something extraordinary. A human, fragile and small, could teach dragons what even an Empress could not command. The choice had been made and it was clear. The hatchlings had chosen Iron Hale, not because of fear, power, or magic, but because of courage, kindness, and the quiet presence of a child unafraid. Valerix Ethrun sat in the quiet of her private chamber, staring at the empty starlit halls. The nursery below hummed softly with the gentle breathing of her albino hatchlings and the small, calm presence of Iron Hale. She had watched them for days, unable to leave her throne or her chambers, yet unable to turn her eyes away. The hatchlings were changing and so was she. Something inside her, something she had never felt before, was shifting. The Empress had always believed that strength, command, and fear were enough to guide loyalty. She had trained her hatchlings with precise care, using every method known to dragonkind. She had expected obedience and admiration, but instead she had witnessed something she could not control. Her brood had chosen a human child. They trusted him, leaned on him, followed him, and it had nothing to do with rank, power, or authority. Iron entered the nursery with a small bowl of food. The hatchlings perked up at his presence, their pale scales glowing faintly. They chirped softly, nuzzling him as he sat down cross-legged on the floor. "Good morning, friends," he said, smiling. "Did you sleep well?" The hatchlings chirped again, curling closer to him as if answering his question. Valerix descended slowly from her chamber, her claws clicking on the polished floor. She had made a decision. She needed to understand this to learn what the child had discovered so easily. Iron noticed her and waved gently. "Hello. Come sit. Don't worry, they won't bite." The hatchlings shifted slightly but did not leave. Valerix knelt carefully, keeping her movements slow so as not to startle them. One hatchling blinked up at her, then returned to Iron, resting its head against the child's small shoulder. The other hatchling stayed close to him, their soft glowing bodies forming a circle of quiet energy. The Empress felt a strange tug in her chest. For the first time she realized that her authority alone could not command love. She had ruled fleets and worlds, faced empires in rebellion, and yet here in this quiet nursery she felt powerless. Not weak, not physically, but powerless in a way that made her heart ache. The child, with nothing but kindness and calm courage, had taught her what all her rules and commands could not. Iron looked at her, his eyes bright and open. "Do you want to try?" he asked simply. "You can sit with us." Valerix hesitated. She had always been taught that dragons showed no weakness, that emotions were a distraction. But the hatchlings were calm and their trust radiated toward the child. Tentatively, she extended a claw and touched the edge of the soft nest. A hatchling sniffed at it, then returned to Iron's lap. Another flicked its tail, its pale scales brushing against her claw before settling back near the child. Valerix closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet energy of the room settle around her. She realized that this was not just about the hatchlings. It was about herself. She had ruled with control, but she had never led with patience, with gentleness, with trust. The child had no throne, no power, no armies, yet he led where she could not. He had taught the dragons a lesson that no empire had ever taught her, that presence, care and courage could command loyalty more deeply than fear. Hours passed, and the Empress sat quietly, letting herself be part of the scene without trying to dominate it. Iron played softly with the hatchlings, humming, offering tiny morsels of food, stacking soft cushions for them to climb. The albino hatchlings chirped in delight, curling around him, brushing against her hand occasionally, and leaning back into Iron's small frame. It was a harmony she had never expected to feel. Valerix watched the child's gentle patience. He never raised his voice, never demanded attention, never tried to command. Yet everything he did drew the hatchlings closer. Every gentle laugh, every soft pat, every careful movement strengthened their bond. The Empress understood then that true leadership was not about enforcing rules. It was about guiding hearts, earning trust, and showing courage even in small, quiet ways. At one point, Iron noticed that the Empress was watching closely. "Do you want to feed them?" he asked softly, offering a small bowl. Valerix nodded, unsure of herself. The hatchlings chirped as she lifted a morsel, holding it carefully. One of the smallest hatchlings took it from her claw, blinking up at her as if to say, "Thank you." The Empress felt warmth rising through her chest. It was not power, it was connection, and it felt far stronger than any fleet, any throne, any law she had ever commanded. The attendants whispered quietly among themselves, amazed at the scene. The Empress of the Star Throne, ruler of thousands of star systems, learning to sit humbly beside a human child and her hatchlings. They had seen generals, diplomats, and scholars fail to earn the dragon's trust. And now, a small human had not only earned it, but had taught the Empress herself how to be present, how to connect, and how to lead with patience. Even as the day ended, the lesson remained. Valerix watched Iron place the hatchlings gently in their soft nests for the night. She knelt beside him, careful not to disturb the fragile peace. "You have taught them much," she said quietly. Iron looked up at her and shrugged as if it were no big deal. "They just like being treated kindly," he said simply. "That's all." Valerix realized that he was right. It was simple yet powerful. She had built empires on strategy, strength, and fear, but she had never learned the value of presence, patience, and kindness until now. The child had given her a gift no star, no throne, no army could provide. She felt something unfamiliar, humility, but it was not weakness. It was understanding. That night, as the stars shimmered above the palace, Valerix remained in the nursery. The hatchlings slept curled around Iron, their small glowing bodies a shield of warmth and trust. The Empress watched them silently, knowing that her brood had chosen a path she could not force, and that she must follow it with them. She understood, finally, that true leadership even over dragons came not from fear but from connection. The galaxy outside moved as always, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place in the nursery. A human child had shown dragons and their Empress that power could be gentle, trust could be earned without command, and courage could exist in the smallest hearts. Valerix leaned back, letting the quiet lesson settle deep inside her. She had learned what no empire could teach, that sometimes the most extraordinary leaders were those who led with patience, care, and the courage to be gentle. And in the soft glow of the nursery, with the child and the hatchlings resting peacefully, Valorix knew the galaxy would never forget the lesson she had learned that day. The stars shone brightly over the palace, their light spilling into the nursery where Iron Hale sat quietly with the albino hatchlings. The soft glow of their scales reflected the distant suns, painting the room with pale, shifting light. Valorix Ethrun watched from the edge, her posture relaxed but her mind alive with thought. The empire she had ruled with power and precision now felt different, softened in ways she had never imagined possible. The hatchlings, her children, had chosen a human, and through that choice something had changed in the galaxy itself. Iron hummed a gentle tune, a song he had made up himself, and the hatchlings chirped softly in response. One of the smaller dragons nuzzled his shoulder, another rested its head against his lap. Iron laughed, a sound so clear and innocent that even Valorix felt a twinge of awe. These small creatures, so delicate and fragile, had grown strong under his quiet care. They were no longer distant, cold creatures of power, they were alive with affection, trust, and wonder. Word of the hatchling's bond with the human had spread quickly through the palace. Scientists and attendants whispered in amazement. No human had ever achieved such influence over dragons before. Some speculated that it was instinct, others thought it might be some rare resonance of energy, but Valorix knew better. It was something far simpler and far deeper: compassion. Presence. The child had no magic, no throne, no soldiers. He had only himself, and that had been enough. The Empress approached Iron slowly. "You have changed them," she said softly. Her voice lacked the usual authority that commanded all who heard it. Instead, it was filled with curiosity and something she could not name. Iron looked up at her, blinking in surprise. "I didn't change them," he said gently. "They just like me. I only stayed with them, that's all." Valorix studied him. The child's courage was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet. It was small gestures, soft words, calm presence. And it had done what no fleet, no decree, no centuries of rule had done: earned the loyalty of dragons. She felt a deep respect for this fragile human, understanding now that the galaxy had underestimated what humans could offer. Strength was not always physical. Leadership was not always force. Sometimes the smallest hearts carried the greatest power. Iron smiled shyly and continued tending to the hatchlings. Valorix knelt beside him, careful not to disrupt the delicate harmony. The hatchlings shifted slightly, allowing the Empress's claw to brush one of their small heads, but only because Iron's hands rested gently on it. She realized the lesson was not just for her. It was a lesson for the entire empire. Love could not be forced, loyalty could not be commanded, and sometimes, courage came in the quietest form imaginable. Days passed, and the bond between the child and the hatchlings only grew stronger. The Empress observed as the dragons began to explore more of the nursery, always returning to Iron when they felt unsure. They learned games, shared soft nudges, and even mimicked his simple songs. The child had taught them patience, care, and gentleness, and in return, they had given him trust, affection, and protection. Valorix reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. She had built an empire with fleets, laws, and fear. She had fought wars that spanned star systems. And yet, a single human child, without weapon or title, had shown her what true leadership meant. It was not about control. It was about connection. It was about showing presence, being calm, and offering care without expectation. And the galaxy, she realized, had taken notice. Outside the palace, emissaries and travelers whispered of the human child who had earned the love of dragons. Stories spread quickly, reaching distant star systems and alien civilizations. They spoke not of conquest or war but of patience, trust, and courage. For the first time, the galaxy saw humans not as weak or fragile, but as beings capable of extraordinary influence through the quiet strength of their hearts. Iron, unaware of the stories spreading beyond the palace walls, continued to play with the hatchlings. He built small towers for them to climb, offered morsels of food, and hummed soft songs. The hatchlings followed him everywhere, chirping happily, curling around his legs and nuzzling his hands. They had grown larger, stronger, but their bond with the human remained unbroken. Valorix watched, understanding that the child had given her brood more than affection. He had given them confidence, trust, and the sense of choice. One evening, as the stars glimmered through the palace windows, Valorix spoke to Iron quietly. "The galaxy will remember what you have done," she said. "You have taught my hatchlings, and me, a lesson no empire ever could." Iron looked at her with wide, curious eyes. I just stayed with them, he said softly. I didn't do anything special. The Empress smiled. That is the point. Sometimes, the simplest actions have the greatest impact. The hatchlings stirred, curling around the child, their pale scales glowing softly in the starlight. They chirped quietly, a sound of peace and trust. Valerix felt a sense of awe unlike anything she had experienced before. The child had shown her that courage and leadership could be small, quiet things, invisible to most, yet powerful enough to change the hearts of dragons, and even the course of an empire. The galaxy would remember that lesson. Across countless worlds, civilizations would come to understand that humans were not to be underestimated. They were fragile, yes, but their hearts carried a quiet force capable of inspiring loyalty, trust, and love in creatures far stronger than themselves. Humans could teach, guide, and lead not by fear or power, but by courage, kindness, and patience. Iron slept that night surrounded by the albino hatchlings, their bodies curled protectively around him. Valerix watched silently, feeling a deep calm settle over her. The lesson was clear and it had changed her. The Empire would never be the same, for its ruler had learned what no law, no war, and no fleet could teach. The most extraordinary strength sometimes comes in the smallest, simplest forms. And so, under the light of countless stars, the galaxy quietly remembered a human child named Iron Hale, who had earned the love of dragons through presence, patience, and care. It remembered that humans were not weak. It remembered that they could touch hearts, inspire loyalty, and teach even the greatest empress what true leadership meant. And the albino hatchlings, glowing softly around their human friend, were living proof that the smallest hearts often carried the greatest power. The stars continued to shine, silent witnesses to the quiet revolution that had begun in a small nursery. And the galaxy knew from that moment on, that humans could lead not with armies or weapons, but with trust, kindness, and courage, the kind of courage found only in hearts willing to care.